Hey there, it's Will Chandler. I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 3 of Amor Fati, The Love of One's Fate. So here we go. Chapter 3, Will's Youth. I was born in Henrico County, Virginia on 13 December 1978. My first memories are at Riverbend Campground, my maternal grandparents' campground in Leeds, Maine. I think I was about 3 when my father came up from Virginia to see my older sister and me. I remember going inside to tell my mother some man was here. To my knowledge, I was 2 when my mother left my father and moved back to her parents' place in Leeds, Maine. By this point, she was fully indoctrinated into the Jehovah's Witnesses. She was, and is to this day, a very strong true believer, and was raising my sister and me as such. Life as a child looked far different for me than it did my classmates. I definitely struggled to connect with other people despite wanting nothing more. You see, for as long as I could remember, I had been told that all of the children at my school would die at Armageddon. I was not to make friends with them unless I was able to have a Bible study with them and save their life by converting them to the Jehovah's Witnesses. Thankfully for the poor unsuspecting kids in my class, that never came to fruition. I was allowed to have one friend growing up, my cousin, who lived about 30 to 45 minutes away and was also being raised as a Jehovah's Witness. My mother had converted her younger sister to the JWs sometime after moving back to Maine with us kids. Let's point out some of the good. I want to focus on some of the bright spots that I remember growing up in grade school. In part, I hope that people will see how very small acts of kindness and compassion can change a life forever. One also has no idea the struggles happening all around them in silence. I distinctly remember the principal at McMahon Elementary School in Lewiston, Maine. He always greeted me with a smile and said, "Where there is a will, there is a way." Hearing that for years from a truly caring adult has made a difference in my mindset since elementary school. I have to mention my second grade teacher. His name may have been Mr. Kelly, but I don't think that is correct. I remember crying the last day of school when he was no longer going to be my teacher. I got beat for that by my stepfather because he wanted to be everything to me. At the end of the day, Mark Tremblay was a very small man. I have great memories of the janitors at my elementary school. They were nurturing retired grandfathers that still wanted to be active with a job, and they were great with kids. I was not allowed to take the bus home because of the bad influence of said kids, even though I had been in school with them all day. My mother was a full-time regular pioneer for the Jehovah's Witnesses, as she has a naively good heart and wanted to help save anyone and everyone. This meant that I was left at school for hours, sometimes until after it was dark, on a quite regular basis. I always made sure that I had a tennis ball in my bag to play catch with myself by bouncing the ball off of the tall school walls. I sometimes would accidentally throw my tennis ball onto the roof. Even if it was the second or third time that afternoon, one of the janitors was always very happy to help me. Never once did they give me a hard time about it. I did leave school after them on some days when I was forgotten about for longer than normal. I didn't know any different at the time, and that it was neglectful to be left at school for so long, even though I was conscious of being the only person at the school. When talking about the good memories growing up, I must talk about Leeds, Maine. That is where my maternal grandparents lived on their campground. Across the Dead River from Riverbend Campground was more family with an ancient Native American overlook position keeping an eye on the campground. My mother's sister Cindy and her husband Normand Perron lived there on a few dozen acres with my cousins. Aside from my mother and aunt, there were no other JWs in the family. 4 of us cousins were being raised as such, but what a reprieve for me to be in Leeds. There was genuine unconditional love given away freely every time from the non-JW members of my family in Leeds. Riverbend Campground. Wow, what a reprieve you were to a traumatic young life. I recall warm smiles and laughter on endless summer days. I remember hay rides around the campground with a wagon full of happy children. I also remember going around the campground with my grandfather on his tractor collecting sap to boil down into maple syrup. I remember the giant weeping willow tree in the front yard of the old farmhouse at the entrance to the campground. There were train tracks out front of the campground as well. I remember waving to the conductor or engineer hanging out at the back of the caboose on a regular basis. They always waved back. I remember the campground pool and fond memories with family there. I recall telling my aunt one time about my cousin who was sitting on the bottom of the pool, but not on purpose. She got him out in time. I also recall sliding down the big hill at the campground in winter as well. I have many amazing memories at that oasis away from my traumatic home life. My earliest memories are of my maternal grandfather are of hanging out in his wood shop at Riverbend Campground or in the campground store. All growing up until my teen years, he taught me woodworking when I got to visit him. That sticks with me till this day as I quite enjoy woodworking and the positive connection to my past and unconditional love. I have quite strong memories of hanging out in a chair or on the couch with my grandfather while watching the Dukes of Hazzard and Chips television programs. For a long time, I did not trust police officers and patrol cars, but was cool with motorcycle patrols. I also must talk for a minute about Norman Perron, my uncle. He was a special forces guy from Vietnam looking for some peace in the Maine countryside. I completely loved and idolized him when I was little, and recall being a bit sad that he was not my father. He treated my cousins, my sister, and me with absolute love and care. He desperately wanted that connection and family. I recall some stories about him when I was growing up, where he was quite comfortable with handling a threat to his family. That stuck with me, and I came to view him as what a man is and should be. It was pretty cool to have Rambo as my uncle and father figure. I do have to talk for a minute about my mother. My life story will not point to her as one of the good guys or someone who did not traumatize me. There are many good memories amongst all the bad. I always knew that she loved me growing up. My experience would probably seem neglectful for most people, but I didn't know any better. I also understand her caring heart. She wanted to help save anyone she could from God's judgment at Armageddon. As strange as it was to first realize and say it, it should be said. The Jehovah's Witnesses fit the description of a doomsday cult. She took her mission from God seriously, and I knew that as a child. She was a very caring and loving mother in many ways. Here's a picture of me. It says Will at about 5 years old. That's in the book there. So the next subheading, we're on to some darker times now. Life took a rather bad turn for us when I was 4 years old. My mother had taken us back to Maine and was a newly converted true believer in the high control group of Jehovah's Witnesses. My mother, sister, and I caught the eye of a fine example of a Jehovah's Witness man. My mother and him were married when I was 5. This was in the Lewiston, Maine congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses in the early 1980s. He became my abuser for over a decade. He had quite the arsenal of abuses, to include verbal, physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, religious, and he also trafficked me at times growing up. The abuses worsened considerably after Normand, my uncle, passed away from a major heart attack when I was 7 years old. I started being taken on work trips. Mark, my stepfather, had a sizable carpet cleaning business. I recall well going to the Holiday Inn off of Exit 8 on 95 near Portland, Maine, to clean the hotel room carpets. We would stay overnight, even though that was nowhere near required, given we only lived a few exits up on the highway in Lewiston. It was only about a 40-minute drive, and it wasn't like we were working late into the afternoon or evening. Some of the trafficking activities happened there starting at 8 years old. I recall there being a pedophile ring in a Lewiston, Maine congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses during the 1980s and early 1990s. There were quite a few other children in that Kingdom Hall that were going through similar abuses as my sister and me. The abuses are known about to this day by at least one current Jehovah's Witness elder that has been in that area for a long time. Said elder also, last I spoke to him, is on the hospital liaison committee for Jehovah's Witnesses in the area. That position entails making sure that current JWs die before taking blood in the hospital. In my opinion, this plays out as coerced death on far too many occasions. My God desires mercy, not sacrifice. I recall some very physically violent leadership in the Lewiston, Maine congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. One such person purposely dislocated my right shoulder when I was 12. He, my cousin, and I were doing some light roughhousing, and the next thing I knew, he got angry, forced me over the desk in the office area we were in, dislocated my right shoulder, and then proceeded to tell me how much I deserved what he was doing to me. He was not a good person and was also a pedophile. From what I was told, he was found dead in a parking lot a few years ago with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. I guess he couldn't live with himself anymore. Home life with my stepfather was a stereotypical walking on eggshells routine, common to families suffering under the thumb of an abuser. It definitely got progressively worse over the years. If we took a car trip, it would just be a matter of time until he got lost, felt small and inadequate, and then he would proceed to take it out on the rest of us. I thought it a marvelous thing when a seagull pooped on him at Disney World one year. I remember him holding me by the neck over the stairs more than once. He seemed to enjoy the terror on my face. My sister and I got our heads knocked around a bit as well. I remember being fought about by my mother and stepfather. She would want to go to her family's place in Leeds with us kids. He wanted me to spend the weekend alone with him. He was quite forceful and got his way when he wanted. One time even going as far as chasing us down in a grocery store parking lot after the Sunday morning meeting at the Kingdom Hall. He got what he wanted. I was his for the rest of the weekend. These were not good weekends. I recall being forced to go out in field service, the Jehovah's Witness name for knocking on doors, as they are known for worldwide. That is not exactly a fun exercise or experience, especially as a child. Back then, it was required that every Jehovah's Witness do a minimum of 10 hours a month in field service to remain in good standing. I also remember being around 7 or 8 the first time I gave a public talk during a Thursday evening meeting at the Kingdom Hall. You do get pushed out of your comfort zone as a Jehovah's Witness. It seems similar to how small moral injuries change a personality over time, then making it easier for you to violate nature, your conscience, in larger ways. Image was always extremely important to my stepfather and the Jehovah's Witnesses. They seem to have skipped over the scripture about it not being a good thing to be a whitewashed grave. My stepfather was entry-level management for the Jehovah's Witnesses as a ministerial servant. He desperately wanted to work his way up the ladder in the JW hierarchy. He loved the praise he got for employing a good number of the Jehovah's Witnesses in a Lewiston, Maine congregation. Fear of his image being tarnished is one of the reasons we went to serve where the need was great, as is the phrase in JW speak. He was a bit worried about his abusive nature coming out in his home area with all his family and friends around. My stepfather was trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, if you will, so we volunteered to go where the need was great to serve as quasi-modern-day missionaries. This looked great on our Jehovah's Witness resume, and insulated him if I was to report him for sexual abuse. You see, if you get called before the private judicial workings of the JW clergy, it stays private. That was the practice, and it still plays out that way often to this day. There would be no chance the elder serving on his judicial committee in the middle of nowhere, Texas, would know or tell his friends and family in Maine the truth of what happened. It would stay hidden, and he would stay safe. Even though it was child sexual abuse that he would be guilty of. Even the other parents in Vernon, Texas would not be warned about the predator in their midst once I reported him. There were quite a few children in that Kingdom Hall. We had a giant yard sale at the end of summer in 1991 and set off for Vernon, Texas in the fall. I was 12 years. We found a house to rent in fairly short order and started our new life. By this time, I also had a younger half-sister who was about 10.5 years my junior. The first month or two was actually quite nice. My stepfather had gone back to Maine for a bit to finalize the sale of our house and his business, get some new commercial carpet cleaning equipment, and then come back to Texas pulling a trailer with the bulk of our goods in it. It was a welcome reprieve to have him gone for a while. He got back to Texas on my birthday in 1991. Friday the 13th of December, which is the day I turned 13, was a crap day. Excuse me, sorry for that. When I was 13, I told my mother about my stepfather sexually abusing me. She and he spoke in the office for a while with the doors closed. Later that day, I had to face him in front of the elders as they went through the judicial process that is the private court system of the Jehovah's Witnesses. I was forced to disclose the abuse in front of my abuser and the elders. I quickly realized that I was not safe talking to these men. I realized that they were trying to silence me. It became evident they were ready to charge me with partaking in a homosexual act with my stepfather, even though I was only a 13-year-old child. I had to answer carefully. This did not lessen my stress levels and further traumatized me. Before that interaction, I had thought that the elders were supposed to be loving shepherds of Jehovah when called upon for help. My mother also took me to the Vernon, Texas Police Department to report my stepfather. I was scared and nervous, especially after my interaction with the elders, who were supposed to be God's representatives on earth. They're God's representatives. The abuse I disclosed happened over the border in Lawton, Oklahoma. That was the only one I had told the elders about. After the reception I got from them, I was not ready to disclose any more. One has to understand how Jehovah's Witness children are brainwashed into thinking and acting. A Jehovah's Witness cannot be a police officer. Therefore, to my child's mind, they could not be trusted to have my best interests at heart. Jehovah's Witness children are taught that police officers ultimately work for the devil. In my child's mind, I thought that if I disclosed any more than I had to the elders, that I might end up getting in trouble and going to jail along with my stepfather. The elders had made it very clear that it would bring reproach on Jehovah's name if I talked any more about the abuse. The abuse I reported to the elders and police when I was 13 years old was not that bad as sexual abuse goes. The Jehovah's Witness leadership, local police, and the local child services person for the state of Texas all pushed for reconciliation of the family. No charges were filed against my stepfather either, as it would have been an hour-and-a-half drive to report it, and we were told that it wasn't really worth it. I had to go to counseling sessions with the local state of Texas child advocate. My stepfather was also required to have counseling with her. As fate would have it, she, Roxanne Sparks, was a pedophile advocate. It seems too much of a coincidence to be a simple synchronicity, but it may well have been. Stranger things have happened in this life. I do wonder if my stepfather had heard of this pedophile advocate, and that was part of why we went to that area of the country. I recall there being quite a network of pedophiles that Roxanne had brought together in northwestern Texas, near Vernon. My sister and I recall being required to go to what I describe as pedophile meetups. Said gatherings of pedophiles and their families of victims would take place at a public park. There were always many, many young children at these events. Something could not have felt more wrong about it, but then again, it was a planned event by a pedophile advocate. Roxanne, the pedophile advocate masquerading as a child advocate, and I did not get along. Everything about her felt off to me. Her counseling sessions were clumsy and off-target at best. She hit it off with my stepfather quite well and became a strong advocate of his. She pushed hard to have my stepfather reconciled with me, my mother, and sisters. I tried to tell my mother about Roxanne, but she would not listen, and I was forced to continue going to the state-recommended and provided counseling sessions. One of the things she did was share gay rape porn with me. The excuse was to try to normalize the abuse so I wouldn't feel all alone. Again, the problem was that what she gave me to read like gay rape porn. Why would you give that to a 13-year-old victim? It is my belief that she was trying to make me into my stepfather. I need to say that we did live separate from my stepfather for a few months after I disclosed the abuse. My mother started off strong but faltered during the process. He was also disfellowshipped for only a few months from the Jehovah's Witnesses. I recall his disfellowshipping being rather short. Of note is that not during that time, nor at any other time to my knowledge, did the elders warn the rest of the flock about the wolf in their midst. It fell to me to warn some of my stepfather's family about his abusive nature when I learned some of my cousins on his side of the family were possibly at risk. That is not a phone call that a 16-year-old wants to make, nor should have to make, but I did. If not me, then who? My memory is that the headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses wrote a letter to the local elders addressing my stepfather's sin, as they like to classify it. In said letter, it was stated that my mother had no grounds for divorce because no adultery had happened. At that time, it doesn't seem like sex counted for divorce amongst the private JW court system, unless it was between the opposite sex of the same species. Let that sink in. You can pretty much find that stated in elders' manuals from around that time period put out by the leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses. There was also the influence that the pedophile advocate, Roxy Sparks, was exerting on the situation and my mother. My understanding was that Roxy was considered the expert, so the police took direction and recommendations from her. My stepfather moved back into the house a few months after he was forced to leave. I had a screen door latch on my door to protect me from him while I slept. If a child needs a lock on their door, then the parent or guardian needs to be forced to leave. There is no excuse for my mother putting us back in harm's way. I consider her tale to be a cautionary one against giving away your agency as an individual to another person or group of people. The pedophile advocate pushed hard and clearly wanted to have the pedophile back in the house with 3 children. By the time I was almost 14, I had some rather strong takeaways and life lessons surrounding what I had witnessed so far. I knew that there was no one coming to rescue me or make life better for my mother and sisters. No one that I was told would protect me was capable of said act or willing to follow through. In my young mind, that responsibility fell to me. I tried to become as my Special Forces uncle and take care of my family myself. After all, no one was coming to help. Thankfully, I had a good example of what it is to be a man in the memories and stories of my uncle. I fully applied myself in the gym with the goal of gaining enough physical prowess to protect my mother and sisters. This became a military mission in my mind. I was living with my enemy and had to play nice for a while until I was strong enough to free my mother and sisters from his oppression. Keep in mind who my stepfather was and why he did some things. There were perverse reasons behind many of his actions. He had been grooming me and abusing me since I was 4 years old. My stepfather really liked professional wrestling. One need not imagine hard the why behind that, given his proclivity for same-sex activities. He liked all sexes and ages at the end of the day, but I think he preferred young males if given a choice. He definitely wanted me to look like a young and fit WWF performer. I learned quite a bit from my stepfather about working out and bodybuilding. He was always stronger than me, as we were working out together and he was a full-grown man, and I was still a child. By the time I was 15, I had almost closed the gap. Patience can be a virtue. That is chapter 3 of Amor, Fati, The Love of One's Fate. This is Will Chandler, handler Guardian Fury. Y'all have a good one.